Hey, everybody. It is Friday, June 27th. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Mununu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, it's Friday.
It's Friday, Friday. What was that girl's name who sang that? Rebecca Black?
Yeah. No, see, certain things are ingrained in us. Certain things are ingrained in us from an era long ago.
Oh, I think it's just been a long week and I'm a little giddy. Should we get to the headlines here?
Let's do it.
Starting in the Middle East, the Pentagon defending the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities and slamming the media over an early intel leak. What, if anything, we learned about the current condition of Iran's nuclear program, and the Ayatollah making his first appearance since the ceasefire. How did he look?
Plus, some really interesting reports coming out of Israel, Jill, that reinforce what we were saying earlier in the week. The war in Gaza might be over sooner than we thought.
To the New York mayoral race, less than 48 hours after Zohran Mamdani's stunning upset in the Democratic primary, the current New York City mayor, Eric Adams, officially launches his independent bid. Adams feeling like his chances just improved.
Jill, if I read you quotes and ask you whether it's Donald Trump or Eric Adams speaking, you might not be able to tell the difference.
The Supreme Court making a big decision when it comes to Planned Parenthood, with 6 more decisions expected today.
Yes, it is the season finale of the Supreme Court today between 10 a.m. and noon. Get ready for some headlines.
To the economy, young graduates facing a job crisis, what's behind it, and women approaching menopause are driving a GLP-1 boom. Major news in the media world, Anna Wintour stepping down as editor-in-chief of Vogue after 37 years, how she helped change the industry.
Florals for spring, groundbreaking.
What else does she say? Thank you. You can go. Is that what did she used to say?
Yeah. I think well, at least that's Miranda Priestley. But Miranda Priestley based on Anna Wintour.
Allegedly.
I don't have any Anna Wintour quotes that I know. I only know Miranda Priestley quotes.
And the wedding of the year, maybe? Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez getting married this weekend in Venice. Who is there? And why Italians aren't so happy about it.
And literally how many private jets have landed in Venice in the past 48 hours.
And it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend, what we were watching, reading, and eating.
Jill, I'm eating ice cream as we record this taping.
Shocker.
I feel like I deserve it after this week.
You do. Yeah.
This is what I came back from vacation for.
All right. Some new details about the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities as the Trump administration stands its ground that the attack had a major impact on Iran's attempt to build nuclear weapons. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and General Dan Kane, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, went before the media Thursday. They offered the Trump administration's most detailed descriptions yet of the planning and execution of the U.S. airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. And they pushed back on that one preliminary intelligence report leaked to the media, which said Iran's nuclear program may have only been set back a few months. Hegseth, combative, even with his former Fox colleague, Jennifer Griffin. Take a listen.
Do you have certainty that all the highly enriched uranium was inside the Fordo mountain, or some of it, because there were satellite photos that showed more than a dozen trucks there 2 days in advance? Are you certain none of that highly enriched uranium was moved?
Of course, we're watching every single aspect, but Jennifer, you've been about the worst, the one who misrepresents the most intentionally. What the president says. I'm familiar.
Report about the ventilation shafts on Saturday night, and in fact, I was the first to describe the B-2 bombers, the refueling, the entire mission with great accuracy. So I take issue with that.
I appreciate you acknowledging that this was the first the most successful mission based on operational security that this department has done since you've been here, and I appreciate that.
Jill, I'll say this. I worked with Jennifer Griffin at Fox News back when I was their top-notch reporter. She calls it straight. She calls out wins for Trump. She calls out losses for Trump. Hegseth, even when he was at Fox, would call her out. He only wants to talk about the wins. Though it speaks to a larger issue here as the administration stands its ground. Notably, in that press conference yesterday, they didn't have any new intel to report. They went into some details about the attack, which you'll get into here in a second. But ultimately, what they were doing was really performing for Trump. And he actually posted on Truth Social being like, that was the greatest news conference ever after watching this combat, this rhetorical combat between his defense secretary and the media. Ultimately here, what's going on is the administration made these very bold statements initially, right? We obliterated the program. I mean, Trump said that within an hour or two of the attack. And then there's this initial intel report that says, well, according to this one intel report based on satellite pictures on Sunday, taken from space, our low confidence analysis is that we may have only set back the program by a few months. So it sounds like there are two stories here, but really my frustration, Jill, is it's sort of not or, but and. As in, what we have here is the media is not reporting the context, which is, again, one agency report from the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is one of 18 agencies, based on some satellite data, showing that the specific U.S. strike did some damage, but didn't obliterate the program. But what we're talking here is about a 12-day war where the Israelis dropped more than 1,000 bombs on a number of sites. And what you have here from the administration is frustration that the media is not reporting the context. And what you have here is the media calling out specific rhetoric from the administration being like, well, technically, it does not appear he obliterated the program, according to this one report. You have this combat happening between the two sides when, in fact, there could be a nuanced conversation. There's a big area of gray here. And so the media should be providing the context and the nuance around that report. They are not. There are many people in the media who like to call out the president and say, oh, look, he wasn't technically accurate. At the same time, the administration could be providing nuance and could be nuancing their answers, but they're not because they're the Trump administration. So they make these bold statements. We obliterated, we completely eliminated without waiting for the full reports. And what they like to do is get in fights with the media. And so it plays to their advantage. That's what their boss likes to do. As in Donald Trump. And so both things can be true, that there is this one report, but the program could be obliterated or close to obliterated here. And the big question will be not months, but how many years the program was set back, and then whether Iran will actually try to go ahead and reconstitute its program.
It does feel, Moshe, in some ways that the Trump administration is perhaps angry with the wrong people, meaning the media that's reporting on that leaked report, when the real issue is that somebody in their intelligence community leaked that information before it was ready to come out.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, but at the end of the day, they could acknowledge, like, yeah, that's accurate. That was one initial report that showed that the specific strike, but we need to get some on-the-ground information. Again, I think we're like a decade past any nuance in conversation here. Everything is about a fight these days. And, the administration is also trying to make this about, like, if you criticize or if you report on this intelligence report, then you are doing harm to our soldiers and our members of our Air Force and our service members who, risk their lives to conduct these strikes. And at the end of the day, in the military, you do after-action reports, right? This was the first use of these types of bombs in the field. Did they work, even if they hit the right targets? Should there have been more bombs dropped over time? Maybe they did it completely right, and maybe Iran did move out some of the uranium in advance, as Jennifer Griffin was asking there. And that's, again, it could be the case, right? And that's no failure on the part of our Air Force. This is a conversation that can happen here, and instead it's turning into a fight because everything is a fight these days, when in fact, again, it could be all of the above. We typically wait for all the agencies to come back with their reports on the ground information. We have to wait for the Iranians to even figure out how much damage was done to these dozens of sites all over Iran. And then they come back with a sort of collective assessment. And again, I do think that the administration does have an argument here, partial. Now, the way that they're carrying it out is sort of over the top. But they have an argument that the media isn't effectively providing context to this report. But at the same time, by attacking them as fake news is, well, no, it's not technically fake news. The report is the report, and they're not denying that it came out of there. And so I hope that what all of you can take away from this is, especially those of you who have written in, being like, which side do I believe? I'm like, you believe both of them. You can believe the media and the Trump administration. And as we told you, in this era of, like, everyone wants immediate information, some things take time. And this could take a few months to really get to the bottom of.
So General Kane presented with visuals some new details about the strikes, showing that all 6 weapons at each vent of the Fordo nuclear site went exactly where they were supposed to go, indicating that it definitely did more damage than that one initial intel report. He said the pilots said that it was, quote, the brightest explosion that they'd ever seen. It literally, they said, looked like daylight. He played videos of the bombing attack on the nuclear sites. He described how they were carried out. One of the big questions, though, did Iran move their enriched uranium stockpiles from the Fordo site? Hegseth said he was not aware of any intelligence that anything was out of place. He implied, but he didn't exactly say, that the enriched uranium was still in Fordo at the time of the airstrikes. On Thursday, the head of the UN nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, said the damage done by the Israeli and U.S. strikes at the Iranian nuclear facilities, quote, is very, very, very considerable. Another question that you alluded to, Moshe, is really whether or not the strikes give Iran more incentive or less incentive to try to develop a nuclear weapon. On Thursday, the Senate received a classified briefing on the strikes. Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, said on CNN, quote, in technical terms, we knocked the living crap out of our 3 targets. His words, not mine.
Yes, I was going to say, that sounds like very technical language, John Kennedy.
He also said, could they rebuild? Yes, of course they can rebuild anything. Will they rebuild? He says, quote, if they do try to rebuild, Israel will be on them like a bad rash, as only John Kennedy could say.
That's sort of a unique Kennedy. But he gets to the larger point here, and that's again, like, we're not having a real conversation or hearing a real conversation in Washington right now, and that they could say, like, the U.S. bombed a certain number of targets. The Israelis bombed a whole bunch of targets. Was the Iranian program set back? Yes. Was it this many, 1 year or 5 years? We don't know, and we're going to figure that out. Nonetheless, is Iran willing to risk another one of those, given that the U.S. and Israel have showcased their superiority over the Iranian military, which is much weaker today than it even was 12 days ago, and definitely much weaker than it was 12 months ago or a couple of years ago. So the question now is, what is the sort of long-term solution here? Diplomatically, Trump has said there will be talks with Iran next week. Iran has not confirmed whether there will be those talks. One of the things CNN was reporting the last day is the Trump administration has discussed possibly helping Iran access a civilian energy producing nuclear program. That's an idea I brought up on Monday, actually, on the podcast.
They must have been listening.
Yeah, that's it. They listened to this podcast and said, that's a great idea from the Mo News podcast. We're going to provide them with a nuclear program. They've lost privileges to uranium enrichment, and that's non-negotiable. Like, sort of like, after the past 2 weeks, guys, you're done here. Now, I will mention one other thing, since it's been speculated about all week. We hadn't heard from the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, in more than a week. And so there was actually some speculation, like, oh my God, did he die down there in his bunker? Like, what's actually happening here? And so he released his first statement from what appears to still be a bunker in the last 24 hours. He congratulated Iran on what he called a huge victory over Israel in the U.S., declaring victory, of course. He had declared victory also on Twitter as well. We should mention, he did appear much more tired than usual. He's already 86 years old. He did not seem in very good condition, hoarse voice, stumbling over his words. He actually, in the past week, apparently had given 3 names of people who would replace him as Ayatollah should he die. The Israelis have said that they actually tried to kill him. They just couldn't find the right target. The defense minister in Israel saying that in the past 24 hours. So, that was a notable headline also from yesterday. So the Ayatollah gave this 10-minute or so speech, a bunch of warnings, threats directed at the U.S. And Israel, threats that, based on the last couple of weeks, there's no way he can make good on them. So we'll have to watch what's actually happening behind the scenes, because in front of the cameras, it's sort of business as usual. We won the war on the Iranian side.
Also, Moshe, now to the war between Israel and Gaza. It is looking like perhaps the Israel-U.S. victory in Iran has sped up the end to the war in Gaza, potentially within the next couple of weeks. Israeli media is reporting that after the U.S. strike on Iran earlier this week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump agreed on a rapid end to the war and the expansion of the Abraham Accords. The report says that Trump and Netanyahu agreed in a phone call that the war would end, again, within 2 weeks, and that 4 Arab states, including the UAE and Egypt, would jointly govern the Gaza Strip in place of Hamas, and the terrorist group's leaders would be exiled, and the hostages would be released.
Yeah, really remarkable details here, Jill, in multiple Israeli outlets, not denied either by the Israeli Prime Minister's office, that there's some sort of deal here in the making. It was interesting in the past 24 hours as Trump sort of out of the blue posted on True Social this huge post calling out the criminal investigations into Netanyahu. He's facing his own trials. It's one of the many similarities between Netanyahu and Trump is he's been facing his own investigation. In fact, Netanyahu also likes to refer to it as the deep state. The Supreme Court is biased against him. The Attorney General, he's fired. It's a whole domestic controversy there in Israel. But nonetheless, Trump posted on social media being like, how could you do this to Netanyahu? He's a hero. Make a deal, make a deal. And it appears that that's having some resonance inside Israel. So maybe this was part of the whole deal, which is like Trump said, I'm going to come to your support and save you from these multiple domestic trials that you face. But you need to wrap up the war immediately and strike a deal here. As you know, we talked about on the podcast earlier this week, Jill, and I said that Netanyahu comes off of this Iran operation emboldened, stronger, higher polling numbers. When you have higher polling numbers, you get what's called political capital. And, you know, that's a term that's thrown around. And that means that you have more power to make big decisions, albeit controversial decisions. And so in Israel, making a deal here means, in all likelihood, giving up a whole bunch of Palestinian prisoners, including Hamas leaders from prison. But he now has the strength to do that because he's like, look what I just did in Iran. I get to do some stuff here now. So that means wrapping up the war, despite what sort of the right-wing flank of his coalition may say. But this deal here with like Arab states now coming in, UAE and Egypt, they've avoided this until now. But certainly they just watched this, showcase of power that Israel put on over Iran, that the U.S. put on. And the Middle East is really a region of showcasing your power militarily. And so, that's super interesting. Jill, as part of this deal, Saudi Arabia would potentially be involved here. As you mentioned, there's talk of extending the Abraham Accords. People have been speculating what countries would be involved in that. Lebanon is being thrown out. Lebanon for years has sort of been controlled by Iran. Well, what's the status of Iran these days? And Hezbollah, their group in Lebanon, weakened. So Lebanon, the Lebanese government has an opportunity there. There's talk of Malaysia, the world's most populous Muslim country, being involved in some sort of deal here with Israel. There's also talk about Israel recognizing a two-state solution with the Palestinians. That's something that's been a huge precondition for the Arab states. But conditioned. There'll be a lot of conditions, like if this, then that. And apparently, as part of this deal, is the U.S. will recognize Israeli sovereignty over parts of the West Bank, which would be hugely controversial. But we'll see how this actually, how all the countries react to these reports. Remember, if we've learned anything, folks, over these past few years, there's a lot of media reports, and then there's actually what happens, and there's usually a difference there. But nonetheless, the fact that they're talking openly about the end of the Gaza war here in the next couple of weeks. Pretty remarkable thing. And I think I said on the podcast, I'd be shocked if the war went on all summer. I assumed it'd be end of the summer, but it appears things are moving pretty quickly here. But it will take a lot of negotiating. It'll also take, who goes in there and actually removes Hamas from Gaza at this juncture, or what's left of Hamas.
All right, and closer to home, less than 48 hours after that stunning upset in the Democratic New York City mayoral primary, the current New York City mayor, Eric Adams, officially kicked off his independent campaign to lead the country's largest city. Adams touted his accomplishments, including his work to lower crime rates and guide the city through the pandemic, while criticizing Democratic mayoral nominee Zohran Mamdani for his socialized policies. Adams re-energized after Mamdani crushed Andrew Cuomo, who was considered the heavy frontrunner in the primary. Well, now Adams is focusing all of his attention on the self-described Democratic socialist. Here's what he had to say.
This election is a choice between a candidate with a blue collar and one with a silver spoon.
Adams saying this election is a choice between himself, a candidate with a proven record of governing, and Mamdani, a state assemblyman who has pretty much no record. Moshe, Adams definitely a little bounce in his step this week.
Yeah, he has been given a new lease on life, at least a chance in the fall. If Cuomo had pulled off the primary, a Cuomo versus Adams race would have been very difficult for Adams to achieve, since Cuomo sort of filled that same kind of establishment gap. But you see, as I joked on Instagram Tuesday night, the second happiest man in New York on Tuesday night behind Mamdani was Eric Adams. and he was waiting for phone calls. And he's been getting a lot of phone calls, Jill, from a number of top financial leaders in New York. The New York Times reports on this conversation with top hedge fund manager Dan Loeb. Others calling him, being like, you are the only man standing in the way between us and New York going towards democratic socialism, the hope, the financial capital of the universe, capitalism, Wall Street. A democratic socialist is going to be charged at the city. So you have a lot of powerful interests who would like to block Zohran Mamdani's path to the mayor's mansion. And, typically, if you win the Democratic primary, you typically go on to win, become the next mayor. But in this case, there's Eric Adams, who's sitting there now as an independent. Why isn't he independent? Well, last year he had the whole federal criminal indictment on wire fraud and other charges that were dropped by the Justice Department, but it made him persona non grata for a variety of reasons. You also have a Republican in Curtis Sliwa, who's sort of like this, every 4 years he runs, he's a character, sort of only in New York character, no shot at winning. And interestingly, Jill, among Republicans, there's talk, they're calling Washington, being like, hey, Trump, can you give him a job in the administration to get him out of this race so we can actually put in a Republican who has a shot at getting more than 15 or 20% of the vote? So Republicans, in addition to kind of Democrats and centrists going around Adams, you have Republicans saying we might have a shot at winning the mayor's office if we actually got a nominee who could win. So a lot of interesting machinations and movements happening, Jill. And, I don't know how much of a national impact this will have, but certainly high interest for those of us in New York, and frankly, anyone sort of interested in watching an off-year election, since there's so few of them in 2025.
Okay, time for the speed read. Let's start at the Supreme Court from Mo News. The Supreme Court ruled Thursday that South Carolina has the power to block Medicaid funding for Planned Parenthood clinics in a technical interpretation over healthcare choices that has emerged as a larger political fight over abortion access. So the 6-3 opinion from the conservative majority blocks the organization and a patient from suing the state. The ruling means that services like contraception, cancer screenings, and pregnancy testing will no longer be covered by Medicaid, which serves low-income Americans. For patients in South Carolina who go to Planned Parenthood, which has clinics in Charleston and Columbia, abortions are banned in the state after 6 weeks of pregnancy. A lower court had sided with the patient and Planned Parenthood, finding that Medicaid allows patients to choose any qualified provider.
Right. So that's what the lower court said, the Supreme Court reversing that. It's notable here, Jill, you mentioned that, of course, Planned Parenthood does, handle abortions, but they also cover contraception, cancer screenings, pregnancy testing, some of the things that, you mentioned there. And there's a lot of lower income folks across the country that are on Medicaid and choose to get their medical services and health services at a Planned Parenthood. But this has been a large fight in a number of states, including South Carolina, where the governor there, and this predates Roe v. Wade, said, well, any Medicaid money, which comes from the government, should not be going to what he felt, this is Henry McMaster in South Carolina, is subsidizing abortions, even if the people going there are not receiving abortions. He doesn't want to be subsidizing Planned Parenthood. Notably, this decision, Jill, could effectively close Planned Parenthood in South Carolina. They get huge income from Medicaid, from the people who use their clinics there in Charleston and Columbia. A bit of the decision here from the majority, Justice Neil Gorsuch, one of the conservatives, he wrote that the law does not clearly and unambiguously give individuals the right to sue to enforce any qualified provider provisions. You mentioned this was a technical ruling, and effectively they looked at the intention of the law and said that the issue here is that you can't sue over this, that it would need to be coming from the federal government, that individuals can't sue to enforce this provision in regards to Medicaid. Now, then you had the liberals, the three liberals, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson writing for them, saying that they were being overly specific in their reading of the law. They felt that the essence of the law showed that South Carolina was evading its liability for violating the rights of Medicaid recipients to choose their own doctors. So the liberals saying, our reading of the law is that with Medicaid money, you can choose your doctors. And the conservatives said, well, we actually think that the law in the way that it's written doesn't allow people to sue over that interpretation. So again, very technical, but basically the 6 conservatives staying in line here, 3 liberals dissenting, and Planned Parenthood, of course, pushing back on this, very worried about what this means nationally, as they've set this precedent here, given the number of people, lower income Americans, who depend on Medicaid and depend on Planned Parenthood clinics across the country who, again, provide abortions, but also provide a number of other healthcare services. Now, the conservatives are arguing that there are other clinics people could go to in South Carolina. They don't need to necessarily go to the Planned Parenthood near them.
And we just want to mention today is going to be a really big day at the court, which is going to release its decisions on its 6 final cases for the term.
Yeah, just like your kids at school, Supreme Court goes on summer break. It's usually right at the end of June, and they keep all their biggest blockbuster cases for the last day. They roll them all out. So look for the headlines on the Mo News Instagram page starting at 10 a.m. Eastern time.
To the economy from the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. labor market is holding steady despite extraordinary economic upheaval. However, it is a bad time to be a job seeker, especially if you're young. Recent college and high school graduates are facing an employment crisis. The overall national unemployment rate is around 4%, but for new college grads that are looking for work, it is much higher, about 6.6% over the past 12 months, ending in May. And that is the highest level in a decade, excluding the pandemic. Young graduates typically face a higher unemployment rate than their counterparts who have been in the workforce longer. But the gap is growing wider between older workers and the young. A report from April from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York said that the labor market conditions for recent college grads, quote, deteriorated noticeably in the first quarter of this year, even for young college graduates who've been in the workforce longer. The culprit, according to economists, is a general slowdown in hiring. So that hasn't really hurt people who already have jobs because layoffs have remained relatively low. It's just made it a lot harder for people who don't have work to find a job. So that includes everyone looking for work, but especially recent grads who are trying to land their first real job.
Yeah, and remember, this is a prelude for things to come when AI continues to get stronger here. And the folks watching it say that the first jobs to go for humans will be entry-level jobs. An economist at Indeed.com says with employers turning more cautious on hires, they're less inclined to gamble on workers with thinner resumes or skill sets. Entry-level hiring has fallen by about 17% over the course of the past 6 years here. That's a stat according to LinkedIn, which obviously is another place where you look for jobs. Since the pandemic, hiring has risen in a few areas: healthcare, construction, education, but tech and financial services, if you're looking to get into those as a new grad, those have become increasingly challenging here. Now, one area, and we talked about this on the special interview that we did recently, that has opportunities for entry-level workers is AI. So if you have a background in AI, a lot of companies want you in as they try to figure out AI. And so right now, that's probably hard words for people who might have a 4-year liberal arts degree who are like, well, what am I going to do now? But ultimately, probably good news for universities offering master's degrees, law degrees. That typically increases at times like this, with people hoping that sort of 3 years from now or 2 years from now, with an extra degree, they might be able to find a job. And what's interesting is, Jill, both for people with college degrees and without college degrees, we are seeing similar trend lines. The environment is actually even rougher right now, according to the latest stats. For high school graduates without a college degree, the average unemployment rate is now 14.5% if you don't have a college degree, and that's gone up over the last couple of years.
Some health news from Axios. Women are being prescribed GLP-1 weight loss drugs at higher rates than men. That's according to some new data. GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Mounjaro are usually covered by insurance when used to treat type 2 diabetes. But a lot of doctors prescribe them off-label for overweight and obesity, which often is not covered. Women have been prescribed GLP-1 drugs at higher rates than men since 2021, and that's according to some data from Fair Health. The data reflects insured adults who get medical care nationally. It does not include people who are buying non-FDA-approved versions of the drugs from compounding pharmacies. About 18.6% of women prescribed GLP-1 drugs got them for weight loss and not diabetes, which is double the rate of men at 9.3%.
So we're on the 6th straight year here where women between 40 and 64 have been the top recipients of GLP-1s. Typically for men, it's actually seniors, 65 and above. is the group that most uses GLP-1s. Again, for women, right now, it's sort of elder millennials and Gen X. One physician in Kansas telling Axios, in his experience thus far, it's been entirely women, many approaching menopause, who ask to be on GLP-1 drugs to lose weight. At a certain age, the things that they used to do to lose weight aren't cutting it anymore. Your body's distributing fat in different ways, hence why many are now turning to GLP-1s. Jill, we did a podcast recently, people can take a listen to, where we dove deep with a doctor on this. And I asked him, he prescribes a lot of GLP-1s. This is our BuzzRx special podcast from earlier this month. And I said, first resort, last resort. He's like, a couple of years ago, I would have said last resort GLP-1. Very much I'm in the world of first resort, because the data that they're getting about its impact and the positive things it's doing for people, even beyond weight loss, a lot of studies, we've talked about them on this podcast, has made him believe that I'm ready to prescribe it to people the first time I see them. Jill, I should mention sleep apnea is another condition where apparently GLP-1s are extremely helpful.
From People, after 37 years at the helm of Vogue magazine, editor-in-chief Anna Wintour is stepping down. She reportedly announced the news in a staff meeting on Wednesday morning. Vogue will now seek a new head of editorial content, while Wintour, who is 75, will stay on as Condé Nast's global chief content officer and global editorial director at Vogue. So she will still be overseeing every brand globally, including Vanity Fair, GQ, and more. The longtime editor began her career at Vogue in 1988, taking the reins from former editor-in-chief Grace Mirabella. Wintour immediately started to reshape the magazine. Her first cover in the November 1988 issue featured a model in a $50 pair of jeans, which was the first time denim was on the cover of Vogue. That model was also wearing a $10,000 designer sweater. It was considered a groundbreaking cover because it mixed high and low, and it also signaled another major magazine advancement that she would be credited for, putting celebrities on the cover, and the rest of the industry soon followed.
To quote somebody, Jill, 1 million girls would kill to have this job.
So we're back to the movie. We're back to the... You're like, my knowledge of Anna Wintour begins and ends.
I have to say, I feel like for a while it was on repeat all the time on USA or one of those cable networks back, but before streaming was really a thing, and you still had to watch rerun movies. I'm talking about the year was 2008. Anyway, I will say that movie premiere for Devil Wears Prada, which of course she's an inspiration. I don't know if the inspiration, but certainly very influential in creating that character. Wintour actually arrived at the theater wearing Prada, of course, for the purposes of the opening.
Well done, Anna Wintour. Nicely played.
Of course, that's the movie you remember with Anne Hathaway, Meryl Streep, Stanley Tucci. And so I just checked Vogue.com as you were reading this story, being I wonder how they're covering it internally at Vogue. And they have this very long quote from her talking about anybody in the creative field knows how essential it is to never stop growing in one's work. When I became editor of Vogue, I was eager to prove to all who might listen that there was a new, exciting way to imagine an American fashion magazine. Now I find that my great pleasure is helping the next generation of impassioned editors. Though she does say she says she'll continue to work on the Met Ball, of course. She seems like one of those people, Jill, that will never stop working ever. But she does say that she plans to remain as Vogue's tennis and theater editor in perpetuity. So it sounds like Anna Wintour will be still heavily involved in what's going on at Vogue.
And finally, from CBS News, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos and former journalist Lauren Sanchez set to tie the knot in Italy this week, even as local frustrations mount over the multi-million-dollar 3-day event. The wedding extravaganza kicked off in Venice on Thursday, with the ceremony scheduled to take place tomorrow at an undisclosed location. This is the second marriage for both Bezos and Sanchez. The 3-day event could cost between about $64 million and $76 million.
What does that mean when you have $200 billion, though, Jill?
Nothing. It means, why aren't they spending more? About 80% of the wedding provisions will be sourced from Venetian vendors. These products include locally made pastries and hand-blown glass from Murano, which is an island known for its long history of glassmaking. Bezos, again, Moshe, is worth about $230 billion, which ranks him number 3.
Almost $229 billion after this wedding, Jill.
So that would be after Mark Zuckerberg, who I guess is number 2 at $246 billion, and then Elon Musk, who is at $385 billion. But Moshe, now to the really fun stuff. Who's going to be there? Bezos and Sanchez invited about 200 guests, including Oprah Winfrey, Tom Brady, Leonardo DiCaprio, Orlando Bloom, Katy Perry, Mick Jagger, and President Trump's daughter Ivanka Trump and her husband Jared Kushner. Italian media also covering the arrival of Microsoft founder Bill Gates, Kim Kardashian, fashion designer Diane von Furstenberg. According to an Italian newspaper, at least 95 private planes have requested permission to land at Venice's Marco Polo Airport.
So that's one private jet for every 2 people that's arrived there. Jill, the first reaction a lot of our community had on Instagram when I posted a photo of some of the celebs arriving was like, wait, I am literally right now reading this drinking out of a paper straw. So what is the climate impact of all these private jets landing in Venice? And like, I'm here trying to save the environment with like my paper straw.
And by the way, those celebrities usually lecture us on
or talk about the importance
for the environment.
Of the environment, etc. My understanding is that I think there's a direct American Airlines jet you could take from a flight you could take from New York to Venice. Anyhow, Sanchez, a little background on her. She's a former local journalist in LA. She recently participated in that Blue Origin space flight that included Katy Perry, as well as Gayle King from CBS, who also is now at this wedding. You know, one of the questions, Jill, I got was like, are all these people actually friends? Like Tom Brady and Oprah and Ivanka and Mick Jagger? Or are they just like all just super rich and all super rich people hang out with each other? And my answer to that is probably a combination of both. I can't imagine they were just like on a text chain, like Bill Gates and Kim Kardashian and like Lauren Sanchez, like LOL, like here's the latest meme. I think you sort of, if you run those circles, you all start to meet each other and hang out. By the way, it's not just Kim Kardashian. Jill, I saw the photos. I feel like most of the Kardashians are there because I saw Kris Jenner, I saw Khloe, I saw Kylie, and I saw Kendall. So I feel like the only one I didn't see there is Kourtney and Rob.
I can't.
That's my Kardashian knowledge.
Know all of them.
Jill, it's fair. It was a very entertaining show keeping up with the Kardashians for a number of years. When I wasn't watching reruns of Devil Wears Prada on USA.
We're learning a lot, Moshe. I actually never watched that show, so I don't know who all of the Kardashians are. I know who Kim is, of course. But it's funny because I saw Kim and Kris Jenner, and I thought maybe Kim was bringing her as her date or something. So obviously, I think Katy Perry and Gayle King are probably friends with Lauren Sanchez now after the Blue Origin flight.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did think the same about some of the other celebrities. It's like, I don't understand. You just have to have like a certain net worth where you're like, all right, you automatically get invited.
Right. You have to have a black card. You have to have an Amex black card, of which, by the way, Amex won't even say how much you need to make or spend. You just get a note from Amex at some point. If you spend enough on a previous Amex, they're like, you're now black card worthy. But I will say, there's been a lot of pictures of the protests in Italy. There was a protest group called No Space for Bezos. They declared victory this week because they actually got the couple to move their post-wedding party that was set to be in one place to another place in Venice. Greenpeace, the environmental group, has joined the mix, saying if you can rent Venice for your wedding, you can pay more tax. They unfolded this huge banner. There are people who have like effigies of Jeff Bezos floating down the water there in Venice. And so there have been a lot of protests there. Now, the Italian government is like, yeah, we're like bringing in like $40 or $50 million here, fellow Italians. So like, this is good for us to host in Italy. But ultimately, third richest man gets in there, sort of rents out half the city for his wedding. Some people already annoyed by all the tourists in Venice are like, enough.
But they're spending so much money. They're bringing so much money to the economy.
Well, and they're making a point of, as you mentioned, hiring locals to do various things. We should mention they're not the first people to choose Venice, like high-profile people to choose Venice for their wedding. George Clooney had his wedding there a few years ago when he married Amal.
One of these days, Moshe, we'll get invited to one of these things.
When we have our Amex Black Card.
All right, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend. Time for what we are watching, reading, and eating. Moshe, what are you watching?
I'm going to do an Iran-themed watching, reading, eating this weekend, Jill. Of course, I did my whole history workshop on Iran. We've gotten great notes about it, by the way. If you're not a premium member, join premium for the 1-hour workshop on all things Iran in the U.S. So without further ado, I will be watching Argo this weekend.
Okay, I was wondering if you were going to say Argo or Tehran, which is that series as well.
The Mossad show on. I'm a couple seasons behind on Tehran, but that's a good note. Tehran on Apple. I need to catch up on that.
I was listening to an interview with one of the directors of that show, and he was like, we need to go back to the drawing board because what Israel just pulled off exceeded our imagination. But he was saying how they have so many friends who are Iranian and how they've been in contact over the 12-day war, and how everyone's just very worried about each other, despite the fact that you've got these two countries that are at war. The people, at least who work on this show, are really friendly.
Yeah, listen, at the end of the day, there's 92 million people who live in Iran, and there's 10 million people who live in Israel, and there's a lot of human beings and innocent people who are caught up in this conflict. And so, one of the things we can take away from the ceasefire is at least that, they don't have to live in constant fear as they were this time last week. Jill, what are you watching?
So I just started The Waterfront. It's on Netflix. I'm very much enjoying it. And I Googled it because I knew I was going to talk about it. I didn't realize it was actually inspired by the real life experiences of its creator and his family. It centers on a prominent North Carolina family's fishing business and some of their struggles. Again, so far, very good. All right, Moshe, sticking with your Iran theme, what are you reading?
So I actually did an interview with this author, Reza Aslan, a few years ago, actually in the height of the Masa Amini protests. And he has a book out called An American Martyr in Persia. And it's a book about turn of the century, one of the first revolutions in Iran. And this is a real life story of an American pastor who went to Persia at the time, and his experience and the lessons you can glean about Iran that still hold true more than 100 years later. So the book is American Martyr in Persia. I got to read a part of it when I did that interview. And if you're looking for sort of the Cliff's Notes version, check out my interview from October of 2022 on the interview feed with Reza Aslan. Jill, what are you reading?
The 30-Day Money Cleanse. Take control of your finances, manage your spending, and de-stress your money for good. It's a personal finance and budgeting self-help book, if you couldn't tell. It's by Ashley Feinstein-Gerstly, a.k.a. the Fiscal Femme on Instagram. She's actually a Mo News podcast listener.
Yeah, she posted about us this week.
Yes, and she kindly sent me a copy a few weeks ago, and I have not gotten to it, and it is now on the top of my list.
All right, Jill, let's close this out. What are you eating this weekend?
I've already started and I can't stop. I made the mistake of buying Trader Joe's chocolate-covered pretzels, and they are addicting. So let's just leave it there. Moshe, what are you eating?
Well, I guess if I'm going to keep it Iran themed, we should pursue a tadig this weekend. If you're not familiar with tadig, it's their crispy Persian rice. Tadig literally in Farsi means bottom of the pot. They have this golden layer of rice at the bottom. So if you're at a good Persian restaurant, go get yourself, make sure you order the tadig. But in reality, I don't have a reservation right now at a Persian place. The thing that I am looking forward to eating this weekend is my wife learned how to make homemade cheese. And Alex made some homemade cheese just before we taped the podcast. So I'm looking to try that out. And we'll probably, I imagine the recipe will be up on her Instagram feed at ALSALL. Elsol. Have you made homemade cheese, Jill?
Never. I didn't even know that was a thing you could do.
Before you could buy cheese in the grocery store, you
I
had to make it at home.
It only makes sense. But
we don't have like a cow or anything. I'll find out how
but you guys do live in an apartment in Manhattan, right?
We do live in Manhattan.
I see her I don't know, churning.
She's churning. She's churning. She's wearing a bonnet.
I mean, what? So that's that cow noise in your apartment. Okay.
Well, I'm really the mayoral candidate I will vote for will legalize my ability to, have a cow here.
We thought chickens were controversial, and maybe even the beehives.
No, I guess you can buy milk at the grocery store and then help use that milk to make the cheese. Of course, you don't need a cow.
All right. Slowly losing our minds here on this Friday. Thank you all for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, Please share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. Again, those reviews really do help us out. We appreciate them.
We appreciate you guys going through the week with us, and we'll see you back here next week.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News Podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.